The other woman, the last completion woman, said she got the video already.
Yeah, someone had mentioned that it's on YouTube.
Oh,
No, I don't know if I asked her about something. I don't know what that what you love it, but that it's on YouTube. So yeah, I was in the network. I'm not.
Good morning. Good morning, Professor Slavin.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's good to meet you. Thanks for doing this.
Of course, it's good to meet you. I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, thanks. You're based in Atlanta, I see.
Yes. And you're in Kansas.
Yeah, in Lawrence, Kansas.
Yeah, Lawrence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you there now? You're not in. Are you in?
No, I'm not in Lagos. I'm here in my office in Lawrence. So
yeah.
I wasn't able to travel. I'd done some traveling some weeks ago. I was in Ghana for our annual Digital Humanities Symposium. So staying back in the region didn't just work for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just
And
got back from a trip last night, actually.
oh
So
wow.
if I'm a little frazzled, I apologize.
Nah.
Yes, we were doing online, right? Just wait for the other panelists and see if they are around.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
That's
Thank you for being one.
Okay, James Yeku, the author himself. What was lunch?
Very fine, sir. How was that?
How are you? Hey, how's it going? Good. I'm the chair. No,
I'm the
not
chair. Are you on a
chair.
fine ticket? Okay, please.
So you're one of the in charge, huh?
Welcome, please.
Yes.
That's okay.
Where do I sit?
Over here.
There.
We're thinking you're going online.
No, I'm here.
Good.
Yes. Yes. Wow. What the fuck? And also to confirm the discussions we have.
Wow. So good afternoon. Good afternoon, good morning or evening, depending on what part of the world you are joining us from. I just want to confirm very quickly how many of us are online. I can see the author, James Yeku, is online. Can you hear me, please?
I can hear you. I've been trying to get your attention all day. Monkey Prof saying hello to you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you very well.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and then of course, Molly Slavin is online as well.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you. I wonder who else is online. We can only see just two of you. Two of you online. Yeah, well, here in person, we have Professor Adeleke Adeko, and of course, we have Dr. Chikezie Uzegunam. I don't know if Mujida Abdul Akim Olagunju is here. Oh, you are here. Please come over. And then, of course, Kwabena Ofoko Ageman. Is he here? Not here. So, yes, so I can confirm we have, we're just waiting for just one person for us to have a full panel. So I think maybe I should just quickly, spell out the ground rules for us. We have about an hour and a half for this session. And we have a panel, a panel of 5 speakers. But so far we have 4 on ground, and then of course the author, please.
Okay.
So for now, I think we'll just limit it in case the 5th panelist joins us.
Yeah.
The plan is for us to have 10 minutes for each speakers. And then we give about 15 minutes for the author to respond, and then about 10-15 minutes for members of the audience to give us their own feedback. That's how it's going to go, and hopefully we might still have some time for us to have additional discussion. I want to start first by saying that our panel, we're here to look at James Yeku's book, The Algorithm of Personality, African Literature and Cancel Culture. The title is that simple, deceptively so, because the discussion, the analysis is very, very rigorous. It is complex, but a very readable book, very, very readable. And then when you look at the subject, it connects to our everyday experiences in Africa, especially some of the current things in African literature. And for me personally, reading this, it takes me back. It's like going back memory lane, because some of the arguments around which this book, the controversies around which this the book is built, things that some of us are familiar with just a few years back. For example, the debate around Achebe, there was a country, and we could still see some of the issues raised then, even in contemporary times, particularly in the last 2 years. You can extend some of the arguments here to other areas of our life, maybe in the politics, in popular culture, and so on and so forth. And so I find this book very, very relevant to whatever we are doing now currently in African.
Yeah, good to see you. Okay.
So
Same here, bro.
So a webinar next week, I think in OAU again, that talks about, this time around is looking at the way Nigerians reacted online to the issues of typing. I mean, in the context of religion now. So very definitely, I can see that some of the issues that are engaged in this book are still very, very current to us. So without wasting much time, I want to introduce our panelists. And of course, their presentation, I want to follow the order in which they are listed here. And here we have first Mujida Abdul Akim Olagunju. You're welcome, please. And then next we have Professor Adeleke Adeko. Dr. Olagunju is from Ahmadu Bello University. And Professor Adeleke Adeko, who has been a regular at LSA conferences here, and then of course very well known, is from Ohio State University. Wabena Opoko Akeman, we are still waiting. Perhaps she's online now.
Oh, she's there.
Oh, good.
Look, Wabena, that's a guy.
Good. Can you hear us, please? Dr. Akeman, can you hear us? Is he muted also?
Hello? Okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
the internet went off.
Okay then. So we're just welcoming you. Good to hear
Hello?
from you.
Yeah.
Yes, hello, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we do, clearly.
Very
Yes, I
clear.
can hear you now.
All right.
Good.
Thank you.
So welcome. He is from the, of the University of Ghana. And then Molly Slavin from Clark Atlanta University. Good to see you. And Chikezie Uzoegunam, Rhodes University. So we'll start right away with Mujida Olagunju. Floor is yours, please.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, because this is already 5:30 and we've had a long day. I would first like to honestly confess that when I got the book and I began to read it, this was the first time I would see see the title council culture. So I have to say, what is council culture? You know, although my research is into digitization, media tech, literary adaptations, and AI. So when I began to read the book, I got really interested because, you know, it sort of speaks to digitization and some of the things that I'm interested in. So first of all, I think, of course, the issue of cancel culture, calling out, it seemed to me more of traditional things. When issues come up, you debate it, you speak to yourself about it, the moral aspect, the immoral aspect, you know. That's how it came up to me at first when I began to read the book. And so many of the works that were talked about, Heart of Darkness, the Great Book. In fact, it took me back to the days of when women feminism began to write about how men used to depict women in their works, and then we made them write about women as well. So while reading these works, there were a lot of nostalgic other things that came to my mind in the video. So debate on cancel culture. And of course, when it comes to the social media, views on trans women, I mean, what will I say? It is like Yeku said, it has its positive and negative sides. But while reading the book, the feeling I got personally was debates have been as so old in our tradition, in our culture, and that these things will always be in the literary circles. One debate on the other. If it's not on colonialism, it will be on one aspect of literary criticism, or one aspect of literary culture, or one aspect of one thing or the other. So I think debates will continue to exist in our circles, in our literary circles. And I think contextually, literary works will always be, especially now that we've gone into digitization, and we're having VR scripts, so we're having ebooks, we're having audio books. And so these are other aspects of literary text that up till now, we will continue to grapple with the different platforms and what we do and what we discuss and how we engage with these different platforms. So I'd like to stop it.
Okay, quite very quickly. We use up to 5 minutes, so not up to that. So it saves us some time. So I'll quickly go on to the next speaker. We'll come back later on to do the further discussion. So Professor Yeku, the floor is yours, sir.
I have 10 minutes.
Yes, 10 minutes. So of course we'll still have additional minutes because
Okay.
I can see we're already saving some time.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, LSA, for asking me for allowing me to do this. And if I do not finish, I already sent a rough draft of my piece to the author, so he knows what to say that I may not say. This is a new book. This is the book shows me new ways, new things that are going on in the African literary enterprise that I've been engaged in for so long that the book surprised me in the new things it showed me in what's going on in African literature. This is a book about the cultivation of African literary personalities in the age of algorithm-driven social media. You need to be clear about that. When you go to this book, that's what you should expect. Yeah, it's about the life of those who make African literature in the age of algorithm-driven social media. If the title brings to mind allusion to Walter Benjamin's regarding the work of art in the age of mechanical reproducibility, I want to believe that James Yeku will not call that accidental. That I think James Yeku is also implying that, also recalling and parting ways from that old piece that we know that most of us read a long while ago, still read. Yeku's focus, construed expansively, is on aspects of the phenomenology of African verbal arts on social media platforms, media that in their essential parts do not exist to merely present what authors have concluded in their minds, but are themselves, the media themselves, the makeup of the media themselves, are prominently constitutive of the arts themselves. I'm saying that to mark what I believe the difference that Yeku is showing us about the nature of social media arts and what we traditionally read in African literature. The book analyzes the character of literary disputes and controversies that, speaking broadly, are almost always expressed as an outrage or anger. Sometimes moral, often political, and not infrequently cultural, but most of the time in combination of all these manners of critique in the way they work. The book explains the role of principal flesh and blood authors and characters of those so-called literary personalities in the book. Yeku also reveals how what appears to ordinary consumers, you and me, as passionate expressions of outrage, of amorphous outrage and anger, are actually creations of what I repeatedly call occultic, algorithmically driven sorting, ranking, and distribution of keywords and phrases that are privileged by the media platforms. But we do not know that as readers. That's one of the new things I learned in this book. Platforms that are carefully designed, but without intentions. So when outrage, in the old media, outrage is you have an intention, you have an ego. Achebe was mad at Joseph Conrad, whom he never met, and he will never meet until maybe they're meeting now in heaven. But he was so outraged by Joseph Conrad. He has this feeling. But in social media platforms, the algorithms have no intention towards you, has no intention towards anybody. So, but the outrage, the rhetoric of, not that it has no effect, those outrage has effect, but the intention of the medium itself it's sorting every time you post. They look for keywords, they sort the keywords, they rank them, and then they match them to what they believe their customers, as it were, would like to do, and be able to hold your attention enough so that it could display an advertisement and call you to read or to buy or do something. But many times we as readers, we are ignorant of that. We do not know. So that's one of the things the book exposes about how algorithms work. Then the outrages might nonetheless result as cancel, what it calls cancel culture in the book, the cancel for personalities. People canceled at the cancellation efforts described in the book include Chimamanda Adichie, Lola Shoneyin, Ainehi Edoro, Ngugi wa Thiong'o himself, God bless his soul, Chinua Achebe, or even Joseph Conrad, though that took place before social media. So not just personalities, but also institutions that he discusses, literary prizes mainly, and online literary publications, Kwani in East Africa, and Nkare or Nkare in Cameroon that he discussed. Yeku's analysis and explorations of these topics highlight the indisputable ascendancy, I'm hesitant to say domination, of social media because that's still old school. Domination, you're fighting domination. There's no domination to fight here. Highlight the indisputable ascendancy of social media as tools of digital storytelling and cultural productions on and about the continent of Africa. As it were, in the age of cancel culture, mediated and created, Yeku prefers performed. He used the word perform or performative a lot. Mediated and created writers have become the main subjects of literary news as well as the literary newsmakers. However, the center of their autonomy as news subjects lie elsewhere in the algorithmic, perhaps occultic black box that manages that ecology. And I took the black box from my reading of other works on how algorithms work. In my reading of Yeku, cancel is the expressed, the word cancel, or the form, cancellation is a form and not just something that happens. The cancel is the expressed, the palpable, humanoid manifestation of the algorithmic age. That's my reading of Yeku. You may disagree with me, I would like to know more. As a form, as a structure of feeling, and I think he used that phrase too from Walter Benjamin, cancel, Yeku shows, was not invented by social media. In African literary history, examples of outrage production fill the pages of transition, first in Kampala, in Uganda, then later in Accra, in Ghana, then later moved to Boston, in the United States, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, even Henry Louis Gates, and also Black Orpheus in Ibadan, where you have Bole Kaja. Actually, he took Bole Kaja from those old fights to describe some of the forms of outrage in contemporary cancel culture going on. So in that, the book recognizes what's going on before. Social media did not invent outrage, but the outrage of social media, the cancel of social media is of a different beast that people need to know about. If they don't, they will be misled if you think it's a continuation. I would summarize his thesis. You can read the book and know what his main thesis are. I've already summarized it. I'll go to some questions that I would like to share with us, which I've already sent to Dr. Yeku himself. Let me list quickly what I read to be features of canceling, how to generate cancel, the way I read them in Yeku. I'll just mention a few of them: ostracization, shaming, censoriousness, to censor, silencing dissent, the absence, if not the death of expertise, and you boast about it, that, yeah, I'm not an expert literary critic, but I can kill, I can condemn. Whereas in the past, they will throw, the editor of transition will throw away your manuscript. Say, who are you? You don't know literature. And you even say you don't know literature and you want to comment on literature. In the age of cancellation, you are free to, actually that's a credential to say that I am not an expert and then go ahead and cancel. Articulating the wish to hold persons in power accountable, conjectural allegations, judgments and conclusions lacking in rigor, susceptibility to conspiracies. For example, the Cardinal Book Art Festival, which it, okay, 3 minutes. Okay, I'll just end here. Which I discussed in the book. I was at that Cardinal Book and Art Festival. I paid my way there to see what's going on. There were debates, intense debates that you don't see in the reports. Lola Shona's spouse, Olu Okunshoyinka, was there. He's a doctor. He engaged other people there on the NGO input in the use of vaccines in northern Nigeria. So people were actually debating, but you don't see all that. It's whether Rufai funded Shonai or not. That's what dominated the discussion. And I was completely shocked because I was there and I paid my way there myself. Nobody paid me to go there. And I saw people there. And I saw there are many others like me who participated at the Kaaba Fest, which is totally left out of the outrage, council, and narration. The reliance on disclosing extremely private information, and you know that connects to anecdotes, the value of anecdotes. You know, when you rely on exclusive information, it cannot be disputed. And once you say that, once that becomes the source of your authority, what can you do? You just hold your hand. And that's the equivalent in old literature will be anecdotes. Anecdote is what you experience and nobody else saw. Manifestly evaluation-free statements. They just make the statement without worrying about the evaluative value or the probative value of what they are saying and the conclusions they are making. There is no evaluation online, for example, in Yeku's book, and I'm accusing Yeku here now. That's my first accusation. Yeku refused to evaluate whether the allegations of complicity labeled against Ainehi Edoro, Wainaina, Ngugi wa Thiong'o are true. Your book did not evaluate them. Yeah, on one hand, it's a good thing, but on the other hand, there's something to say about it. Saying it makes it so in council tradition, in council form, and in this age of algorithm. Saying it makes it so because that's the way the black box is constructed. And that's what people take advantage of. Indifferent to intention or meaning, that's another feature. Indifferent to intention or meaning, but sensitive to reactions and responses. So you don't care about meaning, but you care about okay, my time is up. It's still, 1 minute. Oh, okay, 1 minute. Now I have questions for James Yeku. There are 14 of them, but he already has them. I'll just go through a few. Yeah. What do you wish you had done differently in this book? What do you wish you had done differently in this book? Is African literature the same thing as literature in Africa? That's my other question. Should critics begin to speak of digiture, as we used to say, orature? Should critics begin to think of, and should we regard your book perhaps as one of the founding documents of digiture in Africa, as we did in the past, those who came before me did with orature and oral traditions, because they have the same debate. Should we begin to speak of the digiterary, instead of literary? Is Facebook or Twitter to be treated like publication titles or publishing houses? Is a platform to the algorithmic age what the publishing house or editor was to print? Is it mere coincidence that if his Yorubized critical readers of Achebe were to be believed, there was a country, is a Conradian duck shift, to use the language that Achebe himself used against Conrad. Is it mere coincidence that both controversies in Achebe controversies in your book there was a country and the heart of darkness. Is it accidental that these are about identities? In Achebe's work, he struggled with identities. Isn't cancel culture a diminutive term? Is it not a diminutive term? And the reason I'm asking that, I think we had some discussion before in the past where I used the Yoruba proverb with you, that the person who pardon my language, who defecates on the floor may not remember, but the person who cleans it will never forget. And if the person who cleans the defecation now says, no, you cannot shit in my backyard anymore, go do your nonsense somewhere else, are they moral equivalents? So that's why I'm, but in council social media is the same thing. The word is I understand your argument to the social media engine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to them. But that I do not know how to account for that. Does cancel mean criticize? Does algorithm-enabled cancel culture follow any discernible discourse rules? What can be? I'm quoting old Foucault here. At the middle of your book, I asked myself, where is Foucault when you need him? That's a note that I wrote in the digital version I have. In other words, who decides what can be said? Who can say what? What are the qualifications? What are the training you need to be able to say what you can say as taking part in a discourse? In other words, are all those old rooms so just jettisoned now that we don't need them anymore? Could anything negative be said about what is done or said without creating cancellation? After all, don't make a path of my farm. You stop it one day. If your neighbors they cut through your farm, and you want to stop them, you either build a fence, or you tell, look, this is my cornfield. Don't step through it. You have to make a warning one day. Is that warning still possible? That kind of warning still possible in cancel culture? Didn't journalists say of printed poetry or literature what you, by way of Dean, one of the persons you quoted, say of participatory web? I will not quote the page. You edited a book on the Sorosoke efforts in Nigeria. I know that you did. I spent a lot of time on it. Shouldn't harm be liable to victims of censorship? Shouldn't outrage be available to them in a way that is not the same as those who do harm to others? And finally, this is my final question. Can a non-reader exercise reader agency? Can a non-reader exercise reader agency? Why are these questions important? So that I will not have to say what the author already knows regarding his book that one need not talk about. Thank you very much for this good book.
Thank you very much. Well, you must have noticed that I've allowed Prof to go a bit, some minutes more than 10, because I will see that he had to use your extra time. Oh, you wanted to use it yourself? Okay, we'll see how it goes. So, okay, so we'll see if we can say so. So we'll go next to the next speaker now, Kwabena Okoko Ageman. Please, floor is yours.
No.
I don't think he knows.
Kwabena.
Can you hear us, Kwabena?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
We do now.
you can go ahead. Frozen.
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very honored to be talking about James Yeku's work. I've known him personally for a while, and I've followed his trajectory, and that will influence how I read parts of his work, and I'll explain that later. I think it's an important intervention into an issue that is discussed both online and offline, and having a scholarly bent to it is very important. And I think the various reviewers have said very important things about the book, and I will just add a few things to it. Yeku argues that although masked as a social logic of accountability, cancel culture, which is commonly deployed across the political spectrum, tends to function as a social practice whose many hypercritical impulses include the prescription of unlike speech because of a speaker's political views, a person's perceived moral failures excavated from their past, and the translation of assumed or actual social errors into conditions of public shame. And this ground clearing exercise sort of lays the foundation for the rest of his work, which is
It's frozen again.
well, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, you were
Hello?
frozen for a moment.
Yeah.
Yes, go on.
Go on.
Okay, so I'm not sure where I was. I was just sort of doing an introduction to the book. But because of time, I'll just go into it. It's obviously a small subsection on Ngugi wa Thiong'o, which was also quite poignant because his life has just been celebrated in the ways that it has been. And in this section, there's a critique of the Nobel Prize in Literature. It's entitled Ngugi's decolonization in Ngugi's Nobel Prize fatigue. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so he critiques the Nobel Prize in Literature, presenting it as a symbol of Western literary hegemony and a problematic force in African literary discourse. And if you follow popular media, you see that even sometimes they are betting, there's betting on whether Ngugi would win the Nobel Prize. And he also includes Gabriel Garcia Marquez's view of the prize as a spectre haunting writers, and it's exemplified by this repeated of Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And he then talks about how Ghana's win in 2021 over Ngugi frame it as a snub to African language advocacy and so on and so forth. But I find it interesting because there's then the question, which is an age-old question, which Yeku sort of falls into, which is that when you fixate yourself on Western awards that have typically Western standards, are you not then sort of undermining the same decolonization that you're talking about? If you are reinforcing these Eurocentric validations and values instead of fostering independent African literary institutions, are you not necessarily going back to the same conversations that certain people have a problem with? And I can talk about this in discussion parts. But it's important to still, you could take it from an angle, don't necessarily look at, which sorry. So for
painful.
Yeah, we have spent so much time preparing. This is really painful.
What would
what would win another
what
one?
would yeah. So like I said, it's not necessarily a critique, but I think
So they will know we were
They didn't know.
okay.
Or you thanking it?
Yeah. So I think overall it is important. It is an important work which helps us to see the ways in which this cancel culture issue can be harnessed differently. And I'll just end with a little portion of the work where Yeku wades into that Adichie debate, where people ask whether she should be cancelled because of her comments on transgender. And Yeku has a very sort of mature way of looking at it by saying that, why don't you look at other writers as well, instead of simply canceling Adichie if you're not interested? And I think that spirit helps us to not necessarily throw away maybe with a bathwater to end with a cliche. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I apologize. We were cut off for some maybe 5 or 6 minutes, so we didn't hear you. We're back now. So move very quickly now to Mulis Lavin. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here today. My name is Molly Slavin. I'm an assistant professor in the English department at Clark Atlanta University. I'm excited to be here to talk about the algorithmic age of personality and to continue this conversation we've been having. So, first things first, I very much enjoyed reading Dr. Yeku's book, and I see it fitting into this robust tradition of Africana digital humanities studies with work by scholars such as Andre Brock and Ruha Benjamin. My own institution of Clark Atlanta University recently hosted an Africana Digital Humanities Conference, which I actually unfortunately couldn't attend because I was at a different conference. But I've actually bookmarked this as a text to present to our DH Center on campus as perhaps a shared read or something we can work with in the upcoming academic year. I found it a very valuable contribution to all those interested in contemporary literature, Africana studies, and digital humanities, and I'm excited to see what paths it inspires others to go down. I think I'd like to break my remarks into basically 3 major strands of commentary, and so I'll just get right to it. These are ordered basically in order I encounter them in the text and not necessarily in order of importance. So in the introduction, my son may also come join us briefly, just FYI. I don't know if you saw him, he came down a few minutes ago, but he may be coming too. Anyway, in the introduction this is page XXV, Dr. Yeku writes, "The Romantic era furnishes us with a similar performance of personality politics and can be a starting point for a more historically inflected reference for the algorithmic age of personality." You draw this out for a few pages, but I was really struck by this comparison, and I'd love to hear some more. For example, I think we very often think of the Romantic era as being a time when new ideas around individuality and personhood were developed, especially for writers or other artists, often in reaction to the types of technologies that produced the Industrial Revolution. So is something similar happening now vis-a-vis technology and individuality? In other words, is the internet or tech, which you sometimes hear referred to as like a second industrial revolution, inventing a new understanding of personhood, individuality, and personality? Just personally, I'm interested in hearing a bit more about this as I was hired to teach British literature at a historically Black college or university, or HBCU, which is also an institution that has an Africana digital humanities program. So I'd be interested in hearing more about how the development of the artist's personality or personhood in the digital age slots into longer literary traditions, especially those related to Britishness or colonialism. So then my second and third strands of commentary are kind of interlinked. The first is that when we're talking about cancel culture, and especially with that very opening anecdote you cite, which is the African Book Festival in Berlin withdrawing an invitation to Mahamadou Ould Slahi, my mind goes immediately to the cancellation of Palestine-related speech, and particularly the cancellation of the award ceremony for Palestinian writer Adania Shibley's book Minor Detail at the Frankfurt Book Fair in October 2023. Yes, sorry. The parallels between those two events seem really strong to me, especially because Slahi was canceled for, and this is a quote, supposed ties to Al-Qaeda, as you write, but also for some alleged anti-Semitism, which was the basis of Shibley's own cancellation. So how do you see cancellations around speech surrounding Palestine fitting into your framework? Can we extend out the focus of your text to articulate commonalities with other parts of the world, such as Palestinians or those voicing solidarity with Palestinians? And then the third strand of commentary or query is somewhat linked to that second one, but it's also divergent. Basically, I'd just love to hear sort of a crystallized articulation of how cancel culture is different from what we might term like old school critique, especially with the parallel you draw to the Romantics, as I kind of like to link to that first point above. In other words, I see issues termed translations over things like trans right to actually be often correct. Like it's good to shut down when people are saying bigoted things, and it's actually good to censor yourself sometimes. We can't always say whatever we want to say, whenever we want to say it. or rather we can, but there are social consequences, etc. So then is the difference between cancel culture and something like critique volume, as in it's easier to sick thousands of people on someone in a virtual space as compared to, say, the town square of the 19th century? For image, or excuse me, for example, in an image of Africa, where you provide really excellent commentary on Achebe literally calls Joseph Conrad a thoroughgoing racist. How is that, for example, not cancel culture? Is it because Conrad's already dead, as you note, or is there more to it? And I will say I wrote these remarks a few weeks ago, but just now, Dr. Adiko's point about intentionality earlier in this panel actually helped me understand this a bit better. So thank you for that. But I'd still like to hear more. And I'm aware this is a huge question, so my apologies. On page 136, Dr. Yeku writes that cancel culture and the, quote, unsettling power of algorithms distracts from the actual aesthetic evaluation of the literary object, which is a great sort of crystallization of a lot of your main arguments. How, though, can we accomplish a, quote, actual aesthetic evaluation of the literary object in an age of the internet, globalization, social media, and all the rest of it? I'm fully aware this is, basically the premise of your book, which is why I wanted to end on it. But I really liked that idea, and if possible, would love to hear more about it. Just to conclude, there was so much to admire about this book. I learned so much about how African states use literary festivals to sort of whitewash their policies. I feel as though my understanding of Africana digital humanities was very much deepened, and I learned a ton about fan fiction, which is something I knew essentially nothing about. But those three strands of commentary were the pillars that stuck out the most to me and that I'm looking forward to hearing more about. And then this is just sort of a side note, but I wanted to thank you because every year in my British Writer Survey course, I teach Heart of Darkness and Image of Africa. And I feel like the sections on those texts gave me a foothold for making the debate more relevant to my current students. They really love talking about the internet and social media, and I always feel like a little adrift when the conversation goes there. So this is going to be really fun to incorporate in the class next year. If we have time, I'd love to hear more about how the book could work pedagogically, but I've already asked a ton of questions, so I'm happy to yield my time to someone else. Really looking forward to hearing more from my fellow panelists, from Dr. Yeku and the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm sure that James Yeku is already taking notes of some of these questions that have been raised. So very quickly, we'll go on now to our last panelist, Dr. Uzo.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks everyone for coming. I know it's late, so it's good that you came to our panel. Congratulations, James. I want to start by saying congratulations to you on your book. I know it's not an easy feat to publish a book, your second book, and I want to say that both James and I share a love of digital humanities and researching digital cultures of African populations. And it's my pleasure to be invited to this panel. And I'd like to start by saying that the book looks at African literature today, not only how it is shaped by books and writers, but by the wild world of social media. And James Yeku was interested in how algorithms, specifically, systems that decide what we see on our feeds on social media, how they are changing the way people react to African writing online. And according to him, these platforms do not just connect readers and writers. They stir up controversies, outrage, and cancel culture. According to him, African cultural productions are oftentimes constrained within a digital culture of offense and outrage. Of course, many of you know we live in an outrage porn world where we love drama and outrage and the strange and the provocative and the controversial. The more people get angry or debate something, the more engagement the post gets, and that's exactly what platforms like Twitter and Facebook are designed to reward. James Yeku explores how African literary discussions on social media are increasingly happening in places like Book Talk, where TikTok communities of book lovers create content to discuss or share book reviews and recommendations. There are several other spaces that he gave us examples of in this book. But these platforms also promote drama. Heated arguments about literary prizes, famous authors, or identity politics are not just as accidental. They are part of what Yeku calls the algorithm-driven outrage machine of social media. Well, I think he was quoting Adichie there. Throughout the book, Yeku draws examples from online fights and viral moments, showing how African writers have become both creators and influencers. Their tweets, Instagram posts, and public comments sometimes matter as much as their books, and this is true. He notes that moments like when, for example, Adichie warned that when we participate in the algorithm-driven outrage machine without having a full understanding, we make truth fragile. Yeku also shares how he did his research, and I'm fascinated by the amount of data, the amount of archive that he poured into to bring up such a compelling analysis in the chapters in this book. So basically, he dived into old tweets, Facebook posts, archived blog entries, and he calls this a kind of digital ethnography, saying he even used tools like Wayback Machine to dig up content that no longer exists. But underneath all of this is a bigger question. How do we talk about African literature when so much of that conversation is shaped by social media drama and commercial algorithms? And this is the center point of this book. Yeku is critical of how platforms push us toward outreach and performance. And I'm particularly interested in this performativity on social media. The question that rings in my head right now is the different forms of cancel culture, are they performative? Are they real? Should we take all of them seriously? Or are they just what trolls and ordinary people bored out of their minds sometimes just do for fun on social media? Yeku is critical about how platforms push us towards outrage and performance, saying algorithms attract digital subjects to consume the shaming of others. And in this kind of environment, real conversation can get drowned out by moral grandstanding and online battles. In short, this book shows us how African literature is caught up in a digital culture that thrives on noise. And I think a lot of that is true. But noise, how this noise drowns out the essence of the literature itself, the discussion that we should be having about those books or the writers, and it replaces those kind of discussions with anger and controversy. But instead of rejecting this space, he studies it closely, offering sharp insights into what it means to be a writer, reader, or critic in the algorithm age. The book effectively draws attention to how platforms like Twitter and Facebook incentivize polarizing discourse and elevates literary controversies to spectacles of digital performance. These algorithmically engineered environments, Yeku argues, have transformed African literature into a terrain of inflated ego tendency, public shaming, and virtue signaling, and these are elements central to cancel culture. By unpacking the viral literary feuds and award-related disputes, the book demonstrates how authors, how influential African writers come to occupy a hybrid space between cultural critique and digital celebrity. One of the book's distinctive contributions lies in its application of ethnography, as I've said before, and for me, it's important that such data is used to bring into conversation the theoretical and the empirical. And this, the author does quite excellently. Yeku also challenges the celebratory narratives of digital democratization by noting the extractive data relations that underpin social media's public spheres. The book shifts away from his earlier work on cultural netizenship by grappling with what he calls the more insidious and cosmetic dimensions of digital reception. Far from neutral platforms, social media spaces are shown to be curated and performative, where literature becomes entangled with identity politics, algorithmic incentives, and the moral economies of audience engagement. In conclusion, by focusing on controversies that often arise along the lines of gender identity, sexual orientation, and ethnic differences, Yeku opens a critical window into how African literature functions as both mirror and battleground for broader social anxiety. These moments of rupture, while divisive, also become sites of critical self-reflection, where the boundaries of the literary canon and systems of reward are renegotiated. Ultimately, this book, The Algorithmic Age of Personality, is not simply a study of digital culture's impact on literature. It is a profound inquiry into the reshaping of personality, authority, and readership in the digital age. It offers an indispensable framework for understanding the moral and affective architectures that now shape African literary discourse, an algorithmic poetics of participation, surveillance, and spectacle. I have a few questions, James, if you have time during your response to answer them. And these questions are, the first one is, what has culture got to do with cancel culture? Can someone be canceled without being harassed? And then finally, what is the relation? Is there any relationship between cancel culture and cyberbullying? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Okay then. Okay, we'll give you your unused time. All right then.
And I think I haven't done well with by not congratulating the author on his book. I think I'm very good that I haven't done that. So congratulations, James. When I read the book, like I said, I was really happy to look at what was inside, because I heard cancel culture for the first time, and because it's something that I'm reading and I'm it's part of my research, so I'm sure it's part of my research. So I was really happy to interact with the book. And when Trump was talking, I remember I put down the fact that some of the other names that literature has been given, because of digital literature, is what I also call link literature. Because I was thinking about it as well. There's so much link literature, there's so much digitalization of literature, and it's part of our lives today. And when we're talking about the outrage, news outrage is what it's the only thing that news likes to listen to. And so that is why I think when we speak about why there's so much outrage, and when we talk about outrage, rather, that's what news talks about. So basically, what I would like to add to what every other person has said is the aspect of the trans argument. I think apart from that viral video about Alicia, I don't know if there was any other person also saw the viral video when she was at the, I think, Humboldt Foundation, and she talked about the Africanness and how critical the West has been about Africa. It was that as well. So there was a lot of canceling in that talk as well. And I think she wasn't meaning to. I think in the onset of looking at cancel culture, she feels that she has a moral teaching she needs to sit up to. And so when we talk about cancel culture, we talk about media, digitization, and social media, because the social media is not like the traditional TV and radio. It's the only media that seems to be fast. It speaks to everybody almost at the same time. So a lot of people cancel a lot on social media. And like Paul also said, that if you don't even care what you do on that platform. And so I just wanted to add that to what Yeku had said in his book, and to congratulate him and to say that I also enjoyed reading the book. Thank you.
Brilliant submission. Thank you very much. I think what is emerging from our conversation so far is the manipulations of technology. I mean, there has been so much talk about decolonizing African literature and what have you. But here we are, where algorithm is shaping the kind of debates we have about African literature, what constitutes African literature. So I believe that James Yeku is ready for us by giving us his response to some of the questions raised, and of course, his own reflections on this book in the light of the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Fasson. And indeed, thank you very profoundly to everybody on this panel for such careful handling of your engagement with this book. I'm honored, especially when you have your friends and your teachers and elders like Professor Deko, and of course Dr. Slavin, whom I've just met today. I'm grateful to all of you to to have you responding to this work. I think what is, like one of my mentors would say, what is more tragic than not having critics engage with your work is absolute silence. And so I appreciate the fact that you take this book very seriously. So having said that, I also want to thank the LSA for this platform. I think it's really important that this kind of communities continue to exist for the kind of work we do. So I'm really grateful. I can be at the ALA in Nairobi in a couple of, I think a week or two from now. So the fact that this platform is here is really important to me. So to address some of the very critical comments that have been offered so far, and I do want to say that all of the comments from everybody potentially enrich this book. I wish we had this kind of, maybe I had a workshop, the manuscript before going to the press, and everybody here gave all of this insight, and then I could have taken them to the press to, enrich the book. So thanks for your comments. Thanks for your perspectives. I think there are ideas and perspectives I'll be thinking about in the days and weeks ahead. Dr. Olagunjo, I like the nostalgic elements you identify very early in your intervention, and I think there's a sense in which some of the materials and data, if we could call it that, analyzed in the book points to things about the past. I think Professor Fasson also mentioned this, but beyond this, this longing for the literary past is also some level of the contemporary in the book, right? I opened with something that happened in 2024, just last year in Berlin, and I think I did that also with my first book. The book was out in 2022, and the introduction started with the NSAS movement a year before. So there's this, this tendency to play with the past and the present in my analysis, and I think the idea of nostalgia is really, really important. And I agree with you that debates are always with us, right? And in many ways, this book for me is one way to articulate the importance of debating, right? And probably to go quickly to the point by Dr. Slavin about the Palestinian struggle, the importance of continuing debate, even when the subject matter is touchy, even when the subject matter is something people want to hear about. I remember back in Berlin, I lived in Berlin for 1 year, and there was a time I had a seminar on the content of this book, and it was just about the time Israel was about. This was, I think, November, so a month after October 7 that had happened, and a lot of people in Germany, and of course historically that is understandable, are very much touchy when it comes to Israel and Palestine, right? As a matter of fact, it's constitutionally wrong on legal grounds for anyone to criticize Israel in Germany, right? And so it seems like there's this national sense of guilt that the post-Holocaust moment has produced in that country, some kind of paranoia that makes, therefore, criticize Palestine, something nobody wants to hear. And here was I in Berlin talking about this work, and of course, I was talking about the need to embrace the debates that is with us, the messiness around the human condition that's always with us. And people would not even want to hear it when it comes to Palestine, right? So for me, I think it's important to focus on the idea rather than the people, than the personalities around these ideas. And it's really important. But we can come back to Israel and Palestine later. There are lots that could be said, but one thing I do know, and I think I might have said this either in the book or somewhere in some other book. I have a collection of essays, Ambivalent Encounters, in which I talk about how some of these issues are messy and how on the other hand, we cannot look away from the obvious wrong in certain, cultural and political context. What is happening in Israel is crazy. It's wrong. It's genocidal, right? Like many courts have said. But there are other dimensions to it that I do not understand, and I'm always insisting on the importance of nuance in this debate and the need not to silence anybody, right? Solidarity is always important for me, even when I do not agree with the ideas being discussed. We have to keep talking about these issues because that's why we are academics. But I don't want to return to Professor Adeko's excellent point. I took there a lot of notes, right? Just listening to his presentation. And of course, I had the privilege of reading his intervention much earlier. And, when you wake up to these questions, I actually received this email very early in the morning. It was the first thing I encountered in the morning, and it basically defined my day. Not in a way that brought headache, but I basically had to think about the questions a lot, and there's so much to wrap one's head around. But I agree that.
James, what did you do? Yeah, you have cancelled yourself. Oh, the technology cancelled you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, now. Yeah. You are kind for 2 minutes. You cancelled yourself. Yeah.
Okay. I was just saying I do agree that there's something performative about algorithms, because algorithms ultimately call us to particular forms of action, right? And we can relate that to the question from Chikeze, whether cancel culture is performative. I do think that it's performative, and this also came up in Professor Deko's point, right? And we can think about this in relation to the performativity of utterances and speech acts, right? And think about how cancel culture brings particular subjectivities into being, right? So there's that extent to which, if you look online, the nature of algorithms themselves appear to be ontologically performative, and cancel culture itself, which proceeds from this very technocratic space, becomes a form by which people bring certain forms of realities, practices, and phenomenologies into existence, right? I think point about Kaba Fest is really important. And I like the fact that you stress that you didn't have to pay yourself, or that you paid yourself to Kaba Fest, nobody had to pay for you to go there. I understand what you're saying, Professor Adeko, and I understand what you're not saying, because much of this book has a lot to do with what can be said and what cannot be said. So I understand what you have not said. And for me, it's really important when you stress that you paid your way down, right? I know the interlocutor of that particular expression. So it's important to be able to point that out, right? But perhaps the most pressing issue from Professor Adeko's intervention for me is my refusal to evaluate the claims against Doro, against Adeche, and many other people who were cancelled online. For me, the reason behind this is to try to avoid a moral position, which was not necessarily in this book. I don't want to be the one deciding whether anybody was right or wrong. And I don't know if that's good. I don't know if it's been modest, but I do think it's important to recognize that we're all fallible, we're all messy, we all make mistakes. And I don't want to be my intention, my project was not to say El-Rufai is this or this particular actor is right or wrong. I don't want to focus on personalities myself. To take moral positions and to pronounce moral judgments will be to be caught up in that algorithmic space of personality myself. And I wanted to avoid that. But I do know that a subject such as this can hardly be most effectively framed without taking moral positions. So if I've taken any kind of moral position, you won't find them very frontally expressed. For instance, in relation to the trans experience, I do take some positions, right? I think a woman is a woman, and I think I understand what Adeche is saying, and I understand the outrage, against that came against and now Having said that, I also am very clear that trans people are the most targeted communities, whether in the US, especially in many North, in many, not in the global North, in the global South, in many African contexts where corrupt governments very uncritically make juridical and legislative pronouncement against trans people. And I think that's crazy. That shouldn't be happening, right? So for me, it's okay and it's possible to say trans people need to be protected. Trans people need to be respected for who they are, while at the same time avowing or rearticulating Adeche's point that women are women. Now, that seems to be some kind of moral political position, and being able to offer it in a way that doesn't get me cancelled is probably one of the toughest rhetorical maneuvers in the book. But again, I'll leave that to the critics of the book to examine. What do you wish you had done differently? Okay, final question from Professor Dego. What I wish I had done differently. I don't know. I should probably have paid more attention to Foucault, right? I should probably have paid more attention to I actually had there was this book by Musa Al-Gabi, We Have Never Been Woke. So the cultural contradictions of new elite. Very solid book, I think, from Princeton University Press. I thought that was a fantastic book I could have been in conversation with. I'd also bought John Gillory's Professing Criticism. I thought that's a great book I also could have been in conversation with. So for me, what I could have done differently would have been to be in conversation with some other kinds of works I admire and whose critical project appears to be similar to the kind I think I undertake in this particular work. The other questions I could address, but because of time, I just want to quickly go to Kwabena's point about what alternative Western prizes and literary institutions exist if we were to look away from the Ken Prize. And really, I think the NL Angel Prize in the Nigerian context would be a good example, right? And again, I mean, it's a good example because it's the richest literary prize on the continent. So while I make passing references to the NL Prize in the book, I do not discuss the NL Prize. And the reason for that, I would imagine, is because I think some other people have done this work. Some of our colleagues, Isidore Diala has an excellent piece on the NL Prize in terms of its politics, its prestige, and what have you. Maybe not much the social media side of things. And I don't think it's necessary to reproduce that debate. And I think our colleague over in the UK, what's her name? Jocelyn Kiguru has some excellent work on literary prizes, the Ken Prize. And so my argument for me is it's essential for me to frame my argument in such a way that I'm not poaching. To go back to the idea of poaching from Kwabena's reading, I don't want to poach on the works of my colleagues. I rather want to be in conversation with them and take their argument, complicate and problematize their argument, especially within the context of the digital, right? So, Kwabena, I think the NL Prize is a good example of a prize that does the kind of the kind of work I think the Nobel Prize does for us. But of course, if it's not as pronounced and visible as the Nobel Prize, you know the reason. There are historical and cultural, political reasons for this, which go back to all of the the arguments around what is decolonial and perhaps what is anti-colonial. Just to wrap up very quickly, again, Molly, great intervention with regard to romanticism. I like the perspective about individuality and personhood from the Romantic era. Although I was very careful not to assume a broad and generalized sense of the Romantic age. I was really interested in British romanticism, right? Rather than just the Romantic era, which of course, as you know, is something that's so broad, right? And my interest was to look at how these dynamics of individuality presented themselves through the politics of personality. especially personality, argument, and fields in some of the most prominent periodicals and journals of that era. Right. So, say for instance, Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine, right? And some of the arguments people were having in the context of that magazine, the kind of feuds and literary tensions and scandals, right, that were tied around people rather than ideas, right? Those were the issues I was interested in. And how that for me provides some kind of historical backdrop for what I see online with regard to, say, Enkari Review or, say, Brittle Paper or some other African literary magazine online. So for me, that's the connection. I think I already mentioned the Palestine issue. And finally, how do we promote ethical and aesthetic evaluation of literary taste in the age of social media? That's a big question. I don't know how we can do that, right? Because somebody posts a poem on Facebook and you have 1,000 likes. If you follow Insta Poetry, some Canadian Insta poets has this wide, big, massive followership online. 10,000 people liking this snippet of poetry with an image that goes with it, and you're like, is this a poem, right? As in the way you would read, say, something by Eliot or somebody else. This is a debate that I think is ongoing, right? And it's an important one. And what I think my book does to address the question is to say there's an important debate about how to examine the literariness of some of the cultural and symbolic forms we experience online. And then there's also cancel culture that is distracting from that important question, right? So I mean, that's how I come to it. It's one I'm still thinking about. It's one people like, I think Susanna Sachs was here earlier. She has a great book on network poetics. Shola Adenekan's book also. A lot of people in different contexts, and even in non-African contexts, are grappling with this very important question. So I would love to hear your thoughts at some point on this very important question. And then finally, again, to go back to Chikeze, is cancel culture performative, and is cancel culture the same as cyberbullying? I don't know. It's really, I would imagine that cancel culture is not necessarily something as cyberbullying, but it can become cyberbullying, Chikeze. It can become some kind of harassment, and it's really crazy what people do in the name of accountability, right? So the tension between whether cancel culture promote accountability. I spoke with a prominent literary reviewer in the African context, and that's Ikide Kiola, whom I discuss a lot in this book. And he said to me, I am all up for accountability. And this was in relation to Brittle Paper. He said, my intention is not to cancel Brittle Paper, it is to hold Brittle Paper accountable. And I thought he had this important distinction between both. But the question for me is, how does promotion of accountability become or transition into the stifling of free speech, right? How does it become punitive? So these are the kind of questions I've thought about in the book, hopefully effectively. But to your point, Chigis, I think it could go to the extreme of becoming some kind of cyberbullying, right? That goes beyond the online world to have actual consequences in the offline space, right? People lose their jobs, right, because they were bullied online. So this is a big deal. And I think your question and the other questions from other panelists make me think about other possibilities and directions in which argument could go. Again, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate your very important commentaries on the book.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yeku, for the very detailed response, which is a measure of the quality of questions that were raised. I think it's now time. We have just about 15 minutes for us to conclude this session. So we'll take the conversation to the audience by way of getting your responses, remarks, or questions. Yes, we'll start with you, Dr. Adeshola.
James, I want to join others to express, or rather to congratulate you on the publication of this book. You are aware I started reading it. I haven't gone beyond the introduction, which is itself, it's quite profound in the things you articulate I think that introduction does exactly what, the introduction to a full course, just any scholarly book, should do. And in reading that introduction, I was saying to myself, well, this is a book that does what is scholarly, well-researched, scholarly work, should be doing. It provokes, it educates, it informs, it invites debate. And I found myself, even within the space of that introductory, part, I disagree profoundly with some things, but I just checked myself and said, no, I can't be disagreeing this much, because these are just laying out of the argument that will be engaged, in chapters to chapter. So I should wait, to do that. And that's what I'm going to do, actually. But I found it quite provocative in some of the conclusions and quite informative in some of the things, like Professor Adeko was saying. There were things I didn't know, the back end to, this ginormous machine that we have now invented, and it's shaping the way we live and think and do things. So I would, spend time to go deeper into it. And of course, even when I read the introduction, I had made up my mind that one of the courses I will teach this September, which is literature in African literature in English. The introduction is going to be the secondary reading, for my students. I'm still thinking if we have good money, I might bring you to the class. I mean, I don't bring people if I can't guarantee that we can pay them for being present. So I'll think about that. One question that I have, however, and I was very happy when Professor Adeko, did articulate that. It's from the title. It's African literature. That's the subtitle there. African literature. And I said to myself, especially if you pay attention to the fact that we're bringing Heart of Darkness, and it is other texts that are not essentially African, texts. What then happened to reviving that whole debate? African literature in literature in Africa, or African literature, which one, is it here? I like to, hear more about that going forward. And finally, you have lived where I now live, and you understand, the culture of cognitive politeness in that space. I'm talking about Canada in this instance. And I kind of think about how cancel culture also subtly, happen with the culture of politeness. There's giving a white path for folks that you disagree with. It won't be communicated, but it's a bodily thing that people remove themselves entirely from your space, and they won't have anything to do with it. My immediate thought about that this is an instance cancel culture. I mean, I like to hear what you think, whether we could also think about that as a form of cancel, in this sense. I'll be quite very subtle. So again, thank you very much, and I appreciate the label.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And before we go back to the author, do we have any? Does anyone have a question here? Remark? Okay, we'll get the author. James is the response.
Someone is raising their hand online.
Online?
Yes.
Oh, please, can someone?
They can only drop their question in Q&A.
Please, can you write your question in the Q&A section there for the online participants.
Click Q&A. Yeah.
So, Dr. Yeku, please.
I mean, I
This thing doesn't like you.
Okay.
It's frozen, eh?
Yeah.
This thing doesn't like him. You should, kill a goat.
Okay, back now. Back.
And
can you get me?
Yeah.
You froze for a moment.
Now you froze. Yeah. Now you're back.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, just thinking Dr. Ademola for his very insightful commentary, and to say that there's indeed the sense in which one can think about the Canadian mythology of politeness as offering a framework for the enactment of cancel culture performances, especially, I mean, in a way that is that appears to be friendly, that appears to be neutral, but you are being ghosted or you're being removed from or the platform from particular kinds of spaces. And it might interest you to know that this project actually took on a critical life when I visited Vancouver for some kind of talk, and somebody in the audience, and I think I mentioned this in the book, somebody in the audience asked if I would be willing to cancel Chimamanda Adichie in a classroom if I had transgender student in the class wouldn't like her. So in many ways, my response to that particular question gave birth to this book. I probably had this book down as some kind of journal article and then moving on. But that question got me thinking about what the particular faculty member wanted me to do, the implications of that particular question, also in regard to how people asked questions with regard to Joseph Conrad when Achebe wrote his Image of Africa essay, and all of the whole talk about, post-colonial theory with Edward Said 70s, right? So there's something about Canada that is generative, both in a good way and in sometimes in problematic ways for the expressions of cancel culture. I think that's my response to the question, Adeshola.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question, remark? Well, I'll come back to this side of the table just to, I would like Professor Adieko to speak a bit more about what he calls the occultic black box.
Yeah.
Which is another way of describing the way the algorithm and social media operates. Please, can you comment on this?
Yeah, the idea of black box actually took, I hope James is listening to this as the trajectory of my reading of your piece. I read your book. You made a reference to Pascal. Is it this guy, this French-sounding guy?
Yes, Pascal.
Who,
yeah, Pascal.
You mentioned him. So I went to Google Books, bought him, then finished the book and came back to your book. Then he is the one who explained this idea of black box, because you kept, in your book, I kept seeing algorithmic, algorithm. Then after reading Pascal, I said, yeah, actually this is what James was saying about, according to Pascal, when you submit anything to those platforms, it's keywords. That's why the keywords is very, very important in digital publications, online. They always ask for keywords, even in journals now.
Yes.
Yeah. So that once you post, that thing scans for the keywords, and they rank the keyword quickly based on what they know they've been going on. Then based on the keywords they saw, those machines decide where to send them based on what they know about everybody online. And what they will send you is such that will hold your attention enough until that you are able to read an advert or respond to something. And we do not know that. That's why, and what is occultic about that system is that by law, if Pascal is right, I do not know, social media companies do not have to disclose those formulas. It's unlike patent. Patent, after 70 years, they expire. Anybody can take it and reproduce it, like medicine. After 70 years for books, 25 years for medicine. Once the patent expires, another company could make a generic version of it. Because these algorithms are regarded as trade secrets, they are guided by different laws. They do not have to disclose it, no matter what you say. So that's why the idea of black box, and I made it African and called it occultic. Because if it's a black box, you can as well call it occultic. Because those machines those social media systems, after reading Yeku and Pascal, oh my God, we've been caught in an occultic technology. This thing hold us there. You see, you teach students.
Yeah.
James teaches students. They will hold to those phones for hours.
Yes.
As if you cannot control yourself. So after reading you and Paya, okay, yeah, that's occulting. That's where the occult came from. So that's what I meant by that.
Yeah, it's very clear.
I
Very-
think is
Yes,
it
please.
okay to just
Yes,
very
yes, please.
briefly? I also thought about occultic when I saw your response, Prof. And to go back to the Latin etymology of occultic, the word occultus suggests that it's hidden, concealed, or secret. And that's precisely the way algorithms operates, right? But there's also something about algorithms that we can demystify, right? And that's the fact that these are, the technical workings of programmers, flesh and blood people like us who understand codes. In fact, there's in DH, those who do critical code studies understand, and of course in science and technology studies also understand that these algorithms do not necessarily work in isolation. They work in a co-productionist tension with humans who create them. So on the one hand, yes, they are black box, they are not neutral, they are never objective, they are concealed and hidden. On the other hand, we can also understand them to the extent that we're interested in things like programming codes and languages. And in the world of AI, it gets more insidious, honestly.
Please, Dr. James Yeku, in a minute, can you please look at the question? Can you see the question online? In the or maybe I should read it out for you. I'll just go straight to the question. I think it said, would you say it is easy to forgo the concept of canceling out authors when they make certain positions that don't sit well with the public, their readers, than in a case where an author is found guilty of issues like murder?
Oh.
It's a long question. Let me take it again. It would have been okay if you could just read directly and you have a sense of what. Would you say? Yeah, you can see the question.
Out authors when they make certain positions that don't sit well. Yes, I see the question. So very briefly, I know that till the end of the world, whenever that time is, people would listen to R. Kelly and Michael Jackson will be there. People listen, and you can think about these recent criminal encounters as something that is atrocious, but there'll be people who will still be his fans, right? And so for me, the question about killing out authors based on legitimate criminal things, again, it's part of the debate, right? And sometimes I want to separate an artist from their work. I think so the morality of an artist is not the same as the morality of the work, right? So a criminal, a murderer can actually produce a work of literature, I think. Joseph Conrad, for instance, said all sorts of very unprintable things, which he printed, ironically, right? And today in the cancel culture era, people would say, oh, you can't teach Joseph Conrad. In the era in which every European philosopher and writer wants to be demonized in the decolonial space, you can't do certain things. I do think Conrad is a beautiful novelist whose language is something that can inspire. But that language becomes caught up in racism. So what do? The morality of the work and that of the author are not necessarily the same thing, right? So my point is that I think a murderer can still write excellent work of literature. If today, God forbid, one of our beloved African writers does something, manslaughter or something, it doesn't change the fact that the work is still a literary classic that is widely accepted, right? So again, these are difficult and controversial issues, and it gets to the heart of the book itself. What do you do with controversial and messy works of literature? Ademola, to go back to your question, and of course, Professor Adeko's question about literature.
Very quickly, please, because we have
literature in Africa and African literature. My my sense is to engage with both, really, right? So with Conrad, there was somebody who pushed back and said, James, this work is more media studies than literary analysis, and I said to them, it's not true. I'm reading Conrad's Art of Darkness. I'm reading Things Fall Apart. So there's a lot about both African literary, the African literary material and literature in and about Africa.
Thank you very much. And as we close, I would like to thank our panelists for their very brilliant submissions, and then the audience for your patience. Thank you very much. And the author,
James, for the book.
Dr. James Yeku, thank you for this brilliant book. We can't exhaust
Thank you so
our
much,
discussion on
everybody.
it. So congratulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Kobena.
Thank you.
Thank
See you all
Thank
next
you so
year.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, but you know, Louis Althusser, he killed his wife.
Hmm.
Yeah. He murdered his wife. Even because of that stuff,
And he-
him.